I'm recording now. So material stuff. Introduction to material in Revit. I'm just going to do a wall just to start with. I think it's logical to do that. And I'm going to do a camera. Okay, I'm going to place a couple of windows. Change the type of window. Right, those are small. And also I'm going to make one curtain wall so there's a lot of light coming in. I can do that from level 1. Oh, funny, I can't scroll down. Some problem here. I have a problem with my thing. It's probably related to Zoom. I can't scroll down to get other walls, so don't worry. I'm just going to leave it as it was before, and I'm going to create a couple of floors. At level 1, it's going to be, say, this wood joist. Okay. Level 2, another floor. I'm going to select those walls and actually make sure that their top connection is level 2. And I'm going to also bring that level to 14, so it's a little higher. Okay, I'm going to go to level 1, sorry, and I'm going to create a ceiling. We've talked about all of these things. And the ceiling is going to be at 10 feet high. Gypsum wall board. It says you can't see it because it's actually in the ceiling. I'm going to create a section. And that's our project. Let me place more windows, otherwise there's not going to be any light here. Copy. Okay, so that's a project. It's a big monster building. So if I render this, which is teapot, as you know, and you can go to medium to start with, and you can set like whether it's exterior, interior. This is interior, sun only because I don't have any artificial light yet. And then whatever clouds you want, you can render this. We have a ceiling on the top, a floor on the bottom, a wall, and several windows here. Okay, so the only light is coming through the windows, and that's what it is. I can see a little bit of the material of the floor, a little bit of the material of the walls, and a little bit of the material of the ceiling. Okay. The question is, how do I change this? What material there is now? How can I make my own stuff, my own materials? which kind of makes sense. Well, you need to select first the object that you want to change. If you want to change the material of the floor, you need to understand the floor first. What kind of floor do you have? You have the wood joist ceramic tile. This is the one that it was rendering. So if you're going to modify anything, as always, you need to duplicate it. Let's imagine it is new material. It would be better to obviously call it the material that you want to have there. But just to keep it generic now, I'm going to say new material there. You will go to the layers, which is under edit in the structure, and then you will see that the top layer here is actually the tile mosaic. This is this little thin layer that's on the top of all of the layers. And this is the material that renders. Whatever you see on the top, that's the one that's going to render. No? So how do we change that? We click on the right of the little material title here, and it will open the material editor or material browser. You can search for other materials, like let's say oak flooring. Say okay, maybe oak flooring is not a quarter, maybe it's a half of an inch, depending on what it is, and you change that. You say okay, okay, and if I render this again, it should give us that change. Again, select the floor, change the layer on the top, obviously, to the material you want to be, you want to have. And I just search for a particular material. That is the standards from Revit, and I chose that material. You might like it, you might not like it. We will obviously talk about how we create our own materials in the future. This is just a more simplified version of how we can change things. Walls. Well, you can select the wall, edit the type, duplicate, new material, finish, or whatever material exactly. And as you can see in this particular wall that I selected, there's only one is a generic. By the way, the generic walls are normally assigned as a, I don't know what I'm going to do, and then you should rename them and properly create the layers. Generic is something that doesn't belong in a final project, no, because you should know better what's going on in your project better than just generic, no. So normally we'll add a couple of layers. You will make them finish. By the way, you should choose a little bit wisely the function. You don't need to know all of the functions, but if it's actually structure, which is in the middle of these gray two boundaries, core boundaries, that's normally structure. And that normally is like concrete or metal studs for interior or wood studs for interior, so on. And then outside of that, it's things that are not structural and normally are either finish or thermal layers or membrane layers. This is all the construction needs of that particular wall. No? The material. I chose finish, click on the little three triangles. And let's say that the wall is, as I have done already, carpet. I'm a fan of carpet. And obviously you need a thickness for that. Maybe it's 1/4 of an inch, and that will be shown there. Notice how I placed it on the exterior side. So maybe that's not what I need, and I might need to take it all the way to the bottom, to the interior side. I say okay. Now remember, I was only selecting this wall, and I duplicated. So this other wall is not going to have that change of affected. You can just change the type to the new material finish here. Okay. Now, sometimes when you create a wall, it might be flip. Maybe the interior is in the other side. So you have this little tool that you can actually say, flip the wall. So you can actually place whatever's interior in interior and vice versa. Okay, I changed those two. If I actually render this teapot, it should give me that carpet tone. Notice how as you change the materials, the lighting changes because things bounce between different materials. The light bounces, so it gives a little more of that red to the environment of that wood. So maybe sometimes you change the material and then it becomes like a very dark rendering. So after the rendering is done, you can use the adjust exposure here. Just change it to a little brighter. Make small shifts of this and it will just make it much better. If it's too warm, for example, you can change this to cooler. If you're not looking into a very kind of a yellow and red and orange tones, you can reduce that. Or if it's too intense in saturation, you can make it a little greater, no? Depends on maybe the idea of your project and so on. Okay, change floor, change wall, and obviously you can change the ceiling the same way. Duplicate. Edit. And here you go. Finish gypsum wallboard. It might be that you want to change that to a different material. For example, just gonna go crazy here. Plywood seating, which is probably 5/8 as well. And if you render, it should show that change.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to just change, like make the gypsum wallboard like paint, would you just select paint and then pick the color that you wanted?
There are many ways to go about it. That's a good point. Maybe you want to create another membrane or another layer and call it paint.
Okay.
And give it that, yeah. Because maybe for us in terms of studio or even Viz3 or whatever in the future is not necessary because the image is the same. It's going to render the same if you just change gypsum wallboard for paint. But when it comes to constructing this, if you were to work in an office and you were dealing with construction documentation, you really want to make sure that there's a layer of gypsum board and then another layer, which is paint, because it makes a huge difference in terms of schedules, in terms of pricing, cost, et cetera. No? So there is, that would be changed. Okay, so we do have that option for anything. If you go to railings, you just have to find where the material tab is and change the material. So basically everything obviously should be and it can be edited in its materiality. Okay, now those are the standard materials. So again, if I select the floor, edit type, edit, and I go to oak here, the 3 points, it opens the material browser, which by the way, you can go also by, I believe is under here, manage and materials. It's the same way. Okay, here you will search for the materials you want and you're good to go. Now these ones over here are the ones that are given standard. Depending on your installation, you may have more or less, but this is pretty much the standards. How does the material browser work? There's the graphics, this thing called graphics and this thing called appearance. We're not going to talk about physical and thermal, which are a bit more for engineering purposes. The second and the third, graphics and appearance. Any material that you select has those components as a minimum, graphics and appearance. So if you go to brick, you'll have graphics and appearance here. Okay, if you go to earth, you have graphic and appearance. Door panel, graphic and appearance. Okay, so those are the ones you really want to make sure you understand. Okay, what does the graphic mean? Graphic is the way you actually see the material in the interface of Revit. Okay, so this controls the way you see it in as a hidden line, as a shaded, as a consistent. So you're controlling how these are being presented here in Revit. Okay, has nothing to do with renderings. It has to do with the way you see it in Revit, which is very valuable because you can export any of these. So the way you control those, and you can export them or you can print them in PDF and you can bring them to InDesign as we're doing in panel 2 is valuable. Okay. So how can we change those? So if we go to plywood ceiling, which is the top now of my ceiling, I can take a look at graphics and I can see surface pattern. It says foreground, background, cut pattern, if you were to going to cut it. The pattern that you have here, this is the way you're going to see the material under hidden or shaded view. No? So if I actually add a pattern here, let's say a crosshatch and apply, I mean, it's difficult to see it, but if I get closer, notice how you have that pattern there now, no? There you go, materials, plywood ceiling. That's the material I assigned to the bottom layer of my ceiling, and I just assign a pattern to it. You can select any pattern you want, and this is good again for those particular perspectives that we're doing. Some patterns are, in terms of construction documentation, they're meant to be representing something specifically, like earth, it's always this one, no? So there's some kind of rules that you should follow, but otherwise, if it's more about representation, you can use any of the patterns you want. No, you can do like a diagonal or vertical, whatever, and then apply. That will be present here. No? If it helps some idea that you have about the materiality of your ceiling. So that's where you would change it. You can even change the color of that. Those would be red now. Okay. That's the program. Basically what we see in the background is like more the background, which really doesn't matter that much. The cut pattern is if we are cutting with a section box or is shown in a section, that's where you would change also that pattern. So that in terms of perspective, it doesn't really help as much. It's more of a construction when you have a section of multiple layers and you want to show a different pattern for a layer. Here's where you will change it. Under shading, meaning when you go to shade it here, look at that color on the top. Oops. If I go to materials and I go to plywood, that's the color that is assigned to it, plus the pattern. I can change the color. And there you go. Now, I did something wrong, which is basically I've been changing a plywood ceiling material that is standard in Revit. And what is logical is that you don't edit anything that exists, because next time you use plywood, you might want plywood in its real and standard manner. No? So I've been changing something that exists as a default, but this is more to talk about how you actually change these things. Appearance, this is how it renders. Now, one thing is how you see it, another thing is how you render it. They don't relate, they're not the same thing. If I print this, it's gonna render with an image and I see no reflectivity, no transparency, no bump, and no other things that would be important to do afterwards. Right now, it's gonna have an image associated and it's gonna be applied to that particular layer. You can obviously change that image. Or you can edit the image and change the pattern of it. You can change the brightness of it. You obviously can just search for a different image by remove the image and then add in here another image. Oops, I don't know what happened there. Here I don't think I was, these are materials from the thing where from Revit. I mean, I could just choose another one. And then if I apply, it will be assigned again to the rendering, not to the Revit interface. So if I actually go to Teapot, if I render, it's going to have that new pattern that I just placed there. Okay, so this is to understand graphics versus rendering. One is about how you see it in the interface of Revit, which is useful for many things. But the other one is how you render, what is being rendered. Okay, it's entirely different things. Okay, so that's a little bit of the material world. Graphic appearance again. We can create our own materials. There's a new material here. I don't like the duplicate because normally what it does is connect one and another one. So basically when you change one, it's changing the other one. It's almost like a link material. So I always recommend, if you're thinking of a new material, create a new material. You can right click on the new material, rename it and call it like whatever it is, concrete, new, because there's several concretes, no? And then here start changing the way you see it in Revit and change the way the appearance works. Choose an image, as you have reflectivity, as you have transparency, and we will talk about these things carefully, okay? That's the way I recommend you if you want to create a new material. Another way, if you create a new material, there's another library, which is not the standard, and it's under Closest Assets Browser, this little button here. The Assets Browser opens up another library of materials that is quite large. And it is up for you to decide if you want to use. You can go to Autodesk Physical Materials, Appearance Library, I like. There's a bunch of stuff, ceilings. Look at the number of glasses that you can find. Masonry, metals, you can go with 1,000 aluminums of different colors, different reflections, blah, 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 blah. Woods, you could have. So maybe the option of appearance library, it's one that I recommend working with. How does this work? And this is important. To use that asset browser, you always have to create a new material. That's number one. You create a new material and you want to rename it. No? You rename it as glass, red, cool, whatever it is. So you obviously remember what material it is. And one, create material, rename two. And then you open, while selecting that material, you open the asset browser. You search for the glass you want. Let's say the red. I've seen the red stuff somewhere. Oops. Here, frosted dark red, whatever. And the way it works is that you have to double click on the material in the appearance library in the asset browser to take it into the material you created new here. So look how it goes. It takes a little bit, so sometimes it feels like it's not going to work. If you double click, it takes a while, and this one is about to change slowly. No? If let's see if it worked. If I change, if I close that, there it is. Okay. I basically what I did is somehow import the properties of this material into a new layer I created. Now I can work with that material. How? Well, the way I mentioned before. If, for example, I go to level 1 and I create a new wall, maybe it's a, let me do this very fast, something here funky. Duplicate, glass, red, I created that one and I want to make a very thin 2 inches glass panel. And here under the structure, I'm going to assign that glass, which I just created new, no? Glass, how did I call it? Glass. How did I name this one? I thought I called it glass red. Anyway, I can do it again. New right click, rename, glass red, open the asset, select the appearance library, glass, and I think that was nice. This one, for example, double click, comes into that one and close, and then I have it there. So I can say, okay, so that assigns that material to this element, which I can say okay and okay. And then if I go to the camera, and I can make sure it's working here, background realistic, and there you have it. And if I render this, there you have a glass material that I brought from the asset browser. You can do that with all of those materials, and you have literally thousands of materials there you can choose from. So not only the standards, also the asset browser gives you many more materials that you can do by creating a new one and duplicate, create a new one, rename, and double click to import the information of that material. So that opens up like a lot of opportunities in terms of what materials you can choose. And then in future classes next week, we're going to talk about how do we create our own material and obviously lighting, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I think we can leave it there.